Okay, welcome to Wednesday night against the stream. My name is Jason Murphy. I will be your guide this evening as we traverse the dark recesses of the mind. Some people call it meditation. I call it a search for sanity. Anyway, so yeah, we're gonna sit for about 30 minutes and I'll give some guidance. I'm gonna stay, we've been kind of working with the four foundations of mindfulness, and I've been kind of working around some particular practices. I'm going to have it a little bit more open and just a little bit more focused on breath and just kind of breath and what we call, it's a form of concentration practice. So we'll sit for 30 minutes. And then depending on whether there's any questions or whatnot, it may open up. But I'm going to cover a topic that is in line with where we're at, really the three characteristics of existence, but I'm going to kind of really dive into this understanding of not self or egolessness or emptiness. At least I think that's what I'm going to do now. So let's go ahead and start. So, it's important to have your back in an upright position and feet kind of flat on the floor. It's helpful to just allow the crown of the head to kind of rise up towards the ceiling, kind of thinking about elongating the spine. And then the rest of the body just kind of falls as like a relaxed posture. Just find whatever works best for you. There's no right or wrong way to sit. There's no more spiritual way to be. Meditation is about this process of softening our judgmental awareness and aiming some specific fine-tuning of the mind's attention. And so we don't have to make a big deal out of it. It just is what it is. There's no wrong way to sit. There's maybe some wrong ways to meditate, but I won't get into that right now. So just finding, feeling free to either allow the eyes to close or be downcast. Hearing the bell. And in some way, just kind of settling in to this body, to this space. Just kind of recognizing what's happening in the mind, what's happening in the body, right here, right now. As thoughts and sounds and sensations move through our experience. We're not trying to shut out anything in our present time experience, but we are going to allow thoughts and sounds, and even sensations to some degree to be in the background of attention. As we aim the attention more specifically on the experience of breathing, it's helpful to pick a point, either the tip of the nose or the rise and fall of the belly, and allow that to be an anchor. So, thoughts and sounds, sensations of the body arising, the background of attention. Sometimes we'll get carried off to some story, some history, or some mystery. It's not a problem. It's just what minds do: think, plan, remember. Whenever we recognize that the attention has wandered off, just acknowledging where it's gone. Can use a very simple technique called noting, just noting thinking or future or past, just something like one word. And then aim the attention back, connecting with the tip of the nose, rise and fall of the belly, wherever's most easiest. And the invitation is to just observe the breath, the experience of breathing. If it's the tip of the nose, maybe the coolness on the in breath and the warmth on the out breath. The feeling of air on the upper lip. If your attention is lower down into the belly, perhaps becoming more and more aware of the expansion and contraction or the rise and fall of the belly with each breath. a relaxed curiosity to this experience of breathing. What is this breath like? Again and again, with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, just aiming the attention back, perhaps noting where it's gone with this sense of non-judgmentalness. No need to judge, no need to criticize. The mind is just following its habitual pattern. Becoming more and more curious of the breath, the experience of the breath in the body. can we recognize the beginning, the middle, the end of each breath? again and again, recognizing when the attention wanders off, perhaps noting future, past, thinking. And then aiming the attention back. In breath, know that you're breathing in. Out breath, know that you're breathing out. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to invite an inquiry practice. Your choice, you can repeat this question in your mind or just continue with the breath practice. The question, who am I? Who am I? Just see what perhaps answers arise. So we're engaging the thinking mind. But don't get lost. Just see the label and come back to the breath and back to the question, who am I? Perhaps the next contemplation, where is the I in this body? So regardless of what came up, Just seeing if you can allow the inquiry, the questioning, to just float away. Float down the stream of thought as we land back again in this body, in this breath. Okay. Thanks for all of those who joined and possibly joined after we started the meditation. Those of you in the room. So I want to open up for questions, reflections. We have it on such a way finally because of help where if you have a question, it's being recorded for YouTube later, but your face won't be on the YouTube. It'll just be spotlighting, kind of me on the camera. So if you have a question or a reflection or just anything that you want to kind of share, both in the room or online, if you're online, you can raise your hand and then or you can unmute yourself when I call on you. And if you're in the room, you can just speak up or wave or something. So yeah, what was that like? Questions about the practice, about the instruction. Yes, Michael.
Thank you, Jason. For me, it was a good sit. Like the feeling tone at first was like, I was like kind of tight, but I did a couple of deep breaths and, I got really light and it felt better. I'm really fascinated by the concept of like there being no self. Like I think I heard the term Anatta. And I'm also like, I've been kind of like reading a lot of stuff by Ram Dass and he has a documentary I really want to see called Becoming Nobody.
Yeah.
And I feel like my whole life, just me speaking personally, like, there was social constructs like, here's your name, here's your religion, here's your identity, like, do this. And I think and even like I'm involved with music too, and it was sort of like, be this, do this, like, but with Dharma, it feels like there's interconnectivity and there's an energy, and it's just like, I believe that I'm just in this body now. And I feel like, I'm new to it too. I've been doing it since late December, and I feel like there is like a rewiring and like I'm changing in it. sometimes I'm befuddled by it. Sometimes I feel good about it, but I mean, most of the time I feel good about it, but I just have like a thirst. And, you know, I think the Dalai Lama like calls it like bodhicitta, you know, like
Yeah.
just a thirst for compassion, to do esteemable acts, to have enthusiasm for this. And this is something that really landed on me good, because I feel like it takes pressure off to have an experience be a certain way, or you can just kind of learn more as you go and do the best you can. And I don't feel so beholden to those social constructs anymore. You know, that's how I feel.
Great. Yeah, no, I appreciate your sharing, Mike. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of unpack some of that tonight. So yeah, I just gave a little taste at the end of the inquiry, because I like to do experiential practice. It's really, you know, look, the Buddha was really clear that the Dharma should be understood by a 7-year-old child. That the Dharma is not complicated. And too many fucking people that think they're too fucking smart have really complicated it. And it can be complicated because we like to think about thinking about thinking. But the reality is, if we can just drop in and have some of that shift that Mike was talking about, it's all revealed, you know. One of the concept that I'm going to kind of unpack tonight is can feel complicated, and you don't have to get it for meditation to benefit you. You don't have to believe it for meditation to benefit you. Meditation benefits you if you practice. Period. That's it. And it will benefit you in countless ways, which has been researched for, you know, at least the last 15 years now. So anyway, I'll kind of get back to that. Anyone else before we're in the room? Oh yeah.
So sort of on that same like vein, like when you ask, I guess the question like, who am I? As a certified smart person, my mind immediately went to like, well, also with the question about like, where do I feel in the body? Like mind-body dualism and phenomenology and experience, and like also like this sort of like in between Neplanta, like feel or like state of like being in between two worlds, I guess, and that's where your self resides. But then I kind of had this thought, like, I guess, what is my experience with all of that? Not necessarily what I'm being told, but what is my experience with it?
Right.
And I think that's probably a more important question for me to ask myself than to say, like, how do I understand the philosophy of self rather than just understand myself and what I can do for myself.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to try to just paraphrase. I might not get it all exactly, but for the folks at home or online. So as a certified smart person or extremely intelligent person, they were talking about their experience during the meditation, and you know, kind of immediately kind of going with the who am I and where's the I in the body, going into kind of dissecting and, you know, what their, you know, understanding is philosophically or phenomenologically, which I'm a big phenomenologist actually, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But and then like kind of letting go of that, right, and dropping into what's the felt experience of both the question and this idea of self, right? Is that what you said? Yeah, and then that she talked about, do you identify as she? They identified as more like that's a more important question. So yeah, wonderful. Good good inquiry. Yeah. And I would say keep going with that. All right. It's 8:15. Any last kind of thoughts or sharing? And then I'll just kind of jump in to what's up. Okay, I'll open up for some questions at the end. And I'm not sure if I'm going to actually be able to cover it all tonight. But let me just, so, you know, you had mentioned phenomenology. And so phenomenology is like this, that conditionality. It's the how things are unfolding. And in my experience, that is really what the Buddha was teaching. He was teaching phenomenology. And he was teaching how to heal the mind based on like what we can see is unfolding in our experience internally and externally. And cause this idea of cause and effect, causality. So that being said, I'm going to go through one of the major insights that the Buddha to be, Siddhartha Gautama, who was a man who lived 2,500 and I think 60 or 61 years ago. And he was not a god, and he was not a, an angel or anything like that. That he was perhaps the first psychiatrist. He was very interested in the mind and in the causes and or the way out of suffering and how we create suffering in our lives. So his during this, after but was somewhere 7 or 8 years, I can never remember which one it is, of deep insight practice, came to this awareness of what's known as the 3 characteristics of existence. The first characteristic of existence, there is suffering, also known as the first noble truth. There is suffering in this world. And when I went over that in detail, talked about intolerance to suffering, aspects of suffering. But the reality is suffering is tanha. Tanha is craving. Craving is the cause of suffering. Craving for what? Everything, basically. So seeing that characteristic that is in this world, and then the next insight or characteristic that that Siddhartha came to is anicca, right? This impermanent nature of things, the cycle of things, the phenomenology of things, how nothing lasts, that it rises, stays for a time, and passes away. Our human life, perhaps even this planet, arising, staying for a time, passing away. That there's no end to the change. And maybe you're like me and you lived a portion of your life, or maybe even today, with this like, I'm uncomfortable with change, right? This kind of concept. Change can be uncomfortable because it feels destabilizing. So I just want to kind of talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to get into, I'll maybe break down anicca another time. But the third insight, the third kind of like, holy shit experience is there is no fixed and permanent substantial self. And that being the third insight that the Buddha came to, known as the 3 characteristics of existence. That actually there is no inherent self or substantiality in anything. Nothing is lasting. Back to anicca, back to impermanence, right? And so they are kind of playing on themselves because suffering, craving for what? A self, something to attach to, something to feel stable about, because the instability of this world and the reality of that can feel crazy making. And so, you know, throughout history, and even at the time, even the time of the Buddha, I mean, there was, so what I want to say is that the Buddha was not like super revered in his time. That he had a following. There was people that were like, oh, I totally get what you're saying, and your actions are virtuous. And just like, you know, Jesus of his time, like people didn't like Jesus, they killed him. You know what I mean? Like people tried to kill the Buddha too, because he was speaking out against status quo, because he was speaking out against philosophies or even religious, ritualistic kind of systems that were, in his opinion, you know, not leading to the end of suffering. And so they would often get in these debates and people would ask him all these questions. But suffering, dukkha, impermanence, anicca, those two aspects were found in many different religions of the time, Hinduism and Jainism, and, you know, some of the other kind of philosophical kind of breakdowns of what was happening in the Brahmin class and the, you know, the yogic traditions, what later on came to be yogic or Vedic traditions. And so the kind of stark difference is that all of those and all other religions, with the exception of maybe Taoism, believe in a fixed and permanent self, sometimes called soul. And the Buddha, through his inquiry, through his practice, through his kind of phenomenologically dissecting of experience, wasn't able to find it. 2,560 years ago. And so this teaching is a way of really saying this is the biggest misconception of our life, of our world, is this this I that actually, if we really think about it, causes so much of the suffering that we experience. Maybe some would say all of the suffering, particularly the attachment to the craving for the sense of I and the me and the mind, right? The I, self, me, the ism, if you will. Maybe some of you heard that before. All right, so these are the three attributes. And then, so doing this reflection, who am I? You know, you came up with whatever you came up with that popped up in your mind. And then where is the I in this body? You know, through that contemplation, there were some things that popped up, whether they made sense, maybe it was one thing and you stopped. And that has happened. That's happened for me as well. The inquiry practice is to continually push beyond the boundary of what is the first thing that pops up into our mind. And then the further kind of question into delving into these characteristics of existence is, have whatever those aspects are that we call or perceive as a self changed over time? And so that's like just another kind of, way of thinking about it. Okay. So I'm going to do this. Well, I'm going to give one example of, this is a way that this kind of self, not self, was described to me. Okay. Let's say you get a gallon of milk, like a jug gallon of milk. Okay. And emptied out because this experiment isn't about the milk. And you perforate the milk carton and you cut a hole out of the bottom of it. You cut the bottom out of it. And you take this milk carton, this plastic jug, right, that we're calling a self, and you submerge it in, or we call it identity, and you submerge it in water. Okay? So at what point does the water become the jug or the jug become the water? You know what I mean? Like if you have water and you have this quasi container, the shell really, and you submerge it in another physical material kind of, experience, and the water permeates into the jug and comes up into the jug. So where is there separation between the jug and the water? So that's kind of the question, right? And this is a way to describe not self. That what we call a self would be the shell of the jug and the water that's in just the shell and the water. And when you submerge it and it becomes one thing, but it's not different from anything else. It's still the same. So that's like just kind of I'm going to give a few other examples, but that's one way of thinking about this idea of self versus not self. Okay, so let's talk about some of the ways in which people view self. And we've all been taught since birth, really, to view the self as the I. And we're taught this is me and that's you. And, perhaps I am important, or I am, a man, or I am, right? So getting to different levels of identification that we're given. Same thing with the outside world. We're given all kinds of identification. Remember that thing you'd pull and it would spin around and it would go, the duck goes quack, and then it would go quack, quack. So that's helping us identify duck, quacking, right? And so on and so forth. And every little thing. Just hang out with a child and we want to teach them how to navigate the world, of course, right? But what we're also teaching them is how to view the world and how to view themselves. So self, permanent, monolithic, larger than life, huge, independent. This is some of the ways in which people identify this idea of self. Other schools of belief, hold, this idea of a self. The non-Buddhist idea, where the self as a sense of I or I human, that the changes are verifiable through the body and the mind, right? The I is the possessor of the body and the identification of the body as self. So kind of like the jug is the self and the body. And when you submerge it, it's actually the way in which you are interacting with the world as this jug, as this self, this independent self. But really, it's not independent because it's all part of the water. And anyway, I don't want to get into that. It's with some of you, what comes up in my mind is, well, there's this thin barrier between, that's plastic, right? Between the outside of the jug and the water that's outside of the jug and the water that's inside of the jug, right? But it's still the same water and it's perforated. So the water is flowing through. So, you know what I mean? Like at some point we have to kind of go, okay, what's the difference between the water in and the water out of the jug? So just to kind of try to think about that. All right, so Buddhist idea of not self, dependent arising, emptiness. What is self? self, lacking independent parts, not permanent. One of the ways we talk about this is mind units in waking state and in sleeping state. And some of the ways in which I talk about this is that there is like a candle that you see a flame, but the flame is constantly moving and constantly being born and dying, born and dying, born and dying. It's actually, it's happening so fast that it looks solid, you know, with some movement as the wind kind of pushes it, and it can be blown out. But from until the candle burns out or until it gets blown out, it's a constantly moving process, ever changing. The mind is the same way, not solid. The brain, you know, we can even get into that material form. What's solid about material form? It feels solid, but it's matter. It's made of what? Atoms. Atoms are made of corks, right? And so, you know, the cork is, I think, the smallest thing that we've been able to kind of molecularly break apart, like get it down to quarks, which several quarks make an atom. And they've been like splitting atoms forever. So this kind of, you know, where is the self in, or where is the identification in anything that's material? So there are some differences within Buddhism, within the larger scale of Buddhism. And what I want to say about Buddhism is that I don't necessarily even consider myself a Buddhist. Like, I think that dude was a good teacher, and I like the shit that he said. And I believe that this practice is transformative because it has been verifiably transformative in my experience. But you all have to find out for yourself. And there are different, especially here in the United States, there are different schools of Buddhism that hold different beliefs that developed over different periods of time. One of the best books that I find to just give an overview of that is called Buddhism: A Concise Introduction. And it's by Philip Novak and some other guy. I can't remember. Philip Novak and some other guy. Someone probably knows. But it's a good one. And that what that does is it breaks down all of the different aspects of kind of the different schools of Buddhism. So, like, for example, Tibetan Buddhism, which actually is a later understanding of Buddhism. Basically, Buddhism went from India, northern India, Nepal, into Sri Lanka, and then basically traveled all around the world through Southeast Asia, through Burma, all the way around the world, back through China, and then into Tibet. And then from Tibet, you know, and then like, but in that continent, and pretty much that was the loop. And then later moved out from there. So Tibetan Buddhism, they believe in a bit of a concept of self, but it's not this. It's they call it the clear mind, the clear light mind. Okay, this clear light mind is a part of a self that's, you know, kind of carried on. So it's a little bit of like kind of what is called soul. And the other interesting thing about Tibetan Buddhism is that Tibetan Buddhism then moved into India, and it's actually the only Buddhism that's in India now, where Buddhism started, where Siddhartha Gautama lived. It went all the way around the world and then got mixed up and introduced in all different ways, and then reintroduced into India, into Indian culture. And through all that, there was, you know, every style of what we call, you know, Buddhism, it was developed. And now we have even what's called American Buddhism. You know, we have through our own lens, right? So anyway, so Tibetans have this kind of clear light mind that they think about, and I actually have heard the Dalai Lama himself kind of speak about this clear light mind. And it's not good or bad, and it's not right or wrong. It's just another view. So the idea of things appearing real as an objective or subjective are real, right? Superimposed by the mind. So we're kind of projecting these ideas of what a chair is and what that person is and who this is, and it's all kind of constructed based on these, as we see things. So here's a few examples of what might be considered some not self strategies. A dream appears real while we are unaware that we're dreaming. That shit's, I've had some using dreams where I was smoking crack in my dream and woke up going, you know what I mean? I thought I was smoking crack, and I was in my dream, and there was even some times I remember early in my recovery where I would get up out of bed, clearly no signs that I had left the night before and gone and drank a bottle of vodka or whatever. But even up till I'm in the shower washing and I'm like, did I get drunk last night? That, because it was some belief that I held in the mind from a dream that I had had. So it took me even a while to, even in waking states. Okay, so another subjective experience. So those are kind of objective experiences. Subjective experience. A rainbow, we all have seen a rainbow. A rainbow appears real while you see it from a distance, right? But the closer, maybe you found this, the closer you get to a rainbow, what happens? It disappears because it's a bit of an illusion. It's real and it's not real at the same time. You know what I mean? It's material, it's particles of light, it's angle, and we can see it and we believe it. And, apparently there's a pot of gold at the end. I mean, if you're a leprechaun of some sort or Irish, I haven't not found one, but appears real. All right. So a table is a table because we've learned the meaning of table. Right. But really, it's a kind of a mental imputation, right? And subjective response. So this is the same idea of the self. What are the parts of a table? What are the parts of a car? So we call something, I drove it here, a car. And what is a car? But it's constructed of parts. And when it's in its form constructed of parts, we call it a Volkswagen and there's all these different identifiers, which was an interesting thing for me just recently because I just bought a new car. I wanted a 2020 car. I wanted a brand new car. I've never had a brand new car in my life. And so I started looking at all of the brand new cars and they all kind of look similar. You know what I mean? They all have a similar kind of, there's differences in, whether you get a 2-door and a 4-door and an SUV and, but really they're all kind of the same thing. They all have kind of the same purpose and they all, are constructed kind of the same way. And it actually got kind of hard for me because I was like, should I just get a Honda Civic, whatever, it's reliable and it's brand new and, who cares? Or should I, get the Volkswagen Jetta or the Audi, and, it basically boiled down to what I could afford, right? And some evaluation, but it got me thinking about what is a car? Well, a car is a conglomeration of parts. And if you were to take it and break it apart, is it still a car? Or is it something else? So in that same way, the Buddha is asking us to point to what's, like, what do we know in this experience? What is in our physical, mental, and this is what we call the aggregates, right? So let me just give another example. This is, what's this? It's a pen, right? We call it a pen because we somehow identified it through our life that this is what we call a pen, right? And there might be other things that like look similar, but they lack the pen-like qualities, so they're not pens. But if we take this pen and we, like, is this the pen? Like, where is the pen quality? When does it? Uh-oh, did I make it too tight? There we go. Is this the pen? Is this the pen? Is the ink that's inside the tube the pen? Is the point the pen? Is this shaft the pen? Are all, like, if we look at all of these different parts and we I know you can't really see that at home, but if we just look at the parts, is it still a pen? Or is it parts that are separate, that only when they're put together in a particular way can we identify it as a pen? So again, just something to kind of contemplate for yourself as we unpack some of this. So this is like a wild concept, but from the Buddhist perspective, only in our mind does form exist. Only in our mind does form exist. Okay, so from the philosophy of mind, or from the Buddhist perspective, the chair you're sitting on, the cushion you're sitting on, this laptop that is in front of me doesn't exist. It's really just parts and particles, but we have created it with our minds, right? And so what if, like, we went to a new planet, or we were, there was an alien that came and landed here and didn't have any understanding of what things were. This is kind of the concept of beginner's mind. What would they find? I can't remember. I think there was something about during the first, kind of colonialization and conquering of native peoples of this land, that there were ships and conquistadors, and there were things that the native people didn't see because they didn't have any concept of what that was. They only knew what they knew in their experience, right? So to kind of step completely outside your experience, which, they say babies, that's the only time, like in, the first few months of life, there's just this kind of nothingness. It's like, there's no self. Everything it's like that milk carton and the pool. Everything is just the same, intermingling, moving back and forth, colors and shapes and, sounds, and that's it. It's not even, those aren't even identified. And then we slowly start to identify. Okay. Sometimes people say consciousness is this idea of self. The self is consciousness. I am conscious of my senses, and that allows, and conscious of my thoughts. So consciousness must be the thing, right? And some Western psychologists, including, Freud, but I'm thinking about Jung, really focused on this idea of collective unconscious, right? That there's a collective consciousness that we each can kind of experience. And, you know, those of you who meditate in rooms full of people, there is some kind of, but it's like this permeation. Like there's things that it's not you're conscious and I'm conscious. It's that there's just consciousness as part of is one of these parts. All right. Is this like making sense? I don't know if you guys at home can, is it making sense? I have a few more examples I want to kind of get to. And then I'll open up for some questions because, you know, like I said in the beginning, like you don't got to believe any of this shit, right? And I'll give a couple examples as to like how it matters and it doesn't matter. So this is some of my favorite ways to describe this idea of anatta or not self. Although we imagine ourselves to be a self, right, a real substantial individual, you know, according to the Buddhist teachings, we are in reality nothing more than that flame-like process I was talking about, an ever-changing combination of matter and mind, neither of which is the same for 2 consecutive moments. And, you know, actually, one of the interesting things just there is that, so there's been tons of neuroscience pointing to, you know, where is the self, where's the soul, how can we find it or experience it in the body, you know, and even this is back in ancient times too. There were some, you know, some philosophies, some religions that believe that, you know, the soul is like no bigger than, you know, a plum or something like that. It's something like an egg. It was some kind of a small spherical, and it lives here in the chest, right? And then even neuroscience started to point to, okay, where can we connect the amount of like neurotransmitters or like brain cells that are a cluster of what we call the self. Not able to find it because it's so interconnected, and it's not this body, and it's not you know, this hand, and it's not, you know, the brain. An ever-changing combination of matter and mind, neither of which is the same for 2 consecutive moments. All the components of our being are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and devoid of a self from the Buddhist perspective. Life is not a being, an identity, but a becoming, that not a product, but a process. So there's this like the I that is the product of all of our life experiences and all of the this and all of the that, genetics. And from the Buddhist perspective, that's not it, that it's actually much more of a process that is unfolding, like a body of water is continually finding its way to the ocean, and it's not the ocean, and it's not different than the ocean. Right? At some point, all water on this planet goes to the ocean. Yet some water we look at as different. If it's in rain or in snow, it's somehow different. But ultimately, it's all going to become part of the ocean and then, you know, go through the water cycle, which I think I learned in 6th grade earth science, the water cycle. Apparently that's a pretty awesome way of looking at things. Okay, so there is, in actuality, from the Buddhist perspective, no doer, only a doing. No thinker, only a thinking. No goer, only a going. And so sometimes they call this whole process going forth. So in this sense, the Anatta teaching is not a doctrine of no self. And that's a common kind of misconception. This idea of that there's no self. That's not what the Buddha said. The Buddha said it's not self, that there is no substantial, over time, thing that we can call self. But see for yourself. And I'll get to that in a minute, like why we continually use the term self. So it's not no self, but a not self strategy, right? For kind of shedding suffering by letting go of its cause, leading to, the highest or the kind of unsurpassable kind of happiness or contentment. So at that point, once we've kind of shed all of our preconceived notions of what we are, who we are, this idea of self, then what remains? The questions of self or no self or not self, they fall aside. Once there is this experience of such total freedom, where would there be any concern about what's experiencing it, whether or not it's a self? So there's this monk, and he's walking through the forest, and it's early in the morning. And it's a group of monks, and there's a monk who's at the front of the line as they're walking to go kind of, for alms rounds. And then the monk, it's, just like the light, it's just becoming light, it's just dawn. And the monk sees a snake on the dirt path, and becomes startled. And it becomes, frightened, and is like, oh no, like, I'm in Thailand and there's freaking cobras and they're not fun, right? And so becomes startled, kind of tightens up around the idea of snake. And then upon further reflection, or after telling the other monks, oh no, look out, there's a snake, they kind of investigate a little further, and they find out, oh, it's not a snake. It's a piece of rope that had fallen off a wagon or off a truck. And then all of a sudden, the monk completely calms down, just has a total shift of perception. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about self, not self. It matters and it doesn't matter. And we need to have a sense of self, a sense of, perhaps at times a sense of security. And there's more than that. And at some point we find that there's nothing reliable about that. But we need to take our time in kind of unpacking it. And whenever we can kind of shed this idea of I am, or me and mine, what the Buddha is pointing to is that we'll find freedom from suffering. So I'm going to stop there and kind of open up, and I know it was maybe a little bit long, but any questions about what's been shared? Please.
Isn't it our memories which create the self? All our memories. Without our memories, is there a self?
Right. Great question. Yeah. The question was, is it our memories that create a self? Yeah. So one of my teachers called it selfing, which is this kind of identifying with experience, right? So we have an experience, and then we identify with it, and we kind of lock onto it, and we put it in our knapsack, and then we walk through life. Or let's say, I don't know, it was a sticker, right? We stick it on this body, and we keep walking. We take another, we have another memorable experience. We stick it, and then we're just kind of sticking ourselves with all these stickers of identity, right? So yeah, that would be one way to look at it. Do people with dementia or amnesia Are they still who they were? I'm not sure. I think that there's some remnants of, but that's basically what we're doing. We're creating layers and layers and layers of what we identify with. And what we're trying to do here is just really remove those layers and not maybe identify with past experience as strongly, right? Yeah, please.
Oh, I was just gonna make a comment about that. I read this book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
The man that what?
Mistook his wife for a hat.
The mistook his wife for a hat. Okay,
and it's like
a book.
It's a collection of stories about people, patients of this like neurological psychiatrist or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And one of the patients, which is what the book is titled after, he had this like terrible dementia-like sort of condition that caused him to forget everything.
Right.
And caused him to have like very difficult, like not being able to perceive certain objects as they are. And he was functional in a sense that he could go about his life and like operate like a toaster, for example, without remembering where, if you like move the bread from like one spot,
right,
he would completely forget how to use the toaster.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just like
how we relate to things, and there's different forms of memory too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's kind of operational memory, and this happens sometimes within traumatic experiences too, where there's different kinds of memory that gets stored, and some we can access and some we can't. I don't mean to cut you off, but we are running out of time. But no, I think it's a great example. Yeah, I'd like to check out that book. Yeah. So, others? Anyone else out there? So hopefully this was helpful in kind of unpacking. And again, don't let it be complicated because it matters and it doesn't matter, right? Meditation is still absolutely helpful. But most of what this is pointing to is that our addiction to who we think we are is a huge cause of our suffering. Our attachment to the I, the me and the mine, and the the experiences that we've had, the memories, the perceptual database, as you've heard me say before. Yeah. Oh, I saw a hand and then it disappeared. Was that Misty? Do you want to say something? We have like another minute or two. Yeah, Misty, go ahead. You want to unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. I always was very comfortable with the not self by when I feel or I react, I can identify that everything I have been given, my DNA, my environment, my nature and my nurture was given to me. I didn't evolve out of this by myself. It was all given to me. I'm a product of of my experience. So if I have a harsh reaction or a lovely reaction, I understand that is also a product of what was given to me. And I don't need to be so attached, because if I was born in a different place or to different parents or had different experiences, it would be something else. Anyways, that's my take on it, and I thought I would contribute.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for contributing. Yeah, this kind of, it's also like, I find this personally when I get defended about something, and I can be pretty damn defensive. And then when I incorporate this strategy, I ask myself, what am I defending? If there is no me, well, what am I defending? And then a lot of times that will allow me to kind of soften. But so, take it for what it is. And it can be useful for some people, and explore it for yourself. And how does this fit for you? Like Misty and like Mike and, some other people were saying. And thank you for your time and attention. We're out of time. So we'll see you next week, and I'll I do my best, to unpack some other relatively complicated yet easy topic. So we'll see you on the next installment of This is the Buddhist Teaching. Peace. Oh yeah. And may all the goodness, be dedicated